There's an old story, several times told, but very timely for where we are right now. So remembering that it's been suggested that every character and every element in every story represents an aspect of ourself, let's see how this story speaks to us right now. It's that story of the young man called Hamid. Now, Hamid was a strong and resourceful young man, but times were very hard, times were very difficult, and the only implements that Hamid had in his possession were a pick and a shovel, and he had a wife and 2 children to take care of. So every day he would go out to try to find some work that was able to bring the coinage that would allow him to sustain his family. But it was hard. He barely was able to make a subsistence living. But despite the hardships, Hamid was a happy man, because Hamid had the most beautiful wife in the world, called Serena. She was not just physically beautiful, but she had a beautiful spirit as well. So every day Hamid came back to the joy of being embraced by his beloved and beautiful wife. But there was one thing that Serena regretted, and that was that she was not able to go to the public baths to bathe. Although she never spoke of this to Hamid, Hamid knew of this longing that she had. So, doing his very best, working long hours, he managed to gather the few copper coins that were needed for his beloved wife to gather her clothing and go to the public bath. But after journeying there to the township in which the bath was located, Serena found that the bathkeeper told her that the baths had been closed that day because a very important personage was coming to bathe. But Serena begged, "I've come a long way. I'll stay in the background, I'll stay in the shadows so no one can see me." So the bathkeeper conceded and allowed her to enter. So Serena made herself small in the corner of the baths, and then, with great pomp and ceremony, the important personage arrived. And Serena had been told that this personage happened to be the wife of the court astrologer, the personal astrologer to the king himself. So in came this personage, swathed in silk and satin. But as Serena observed, as the servants, the maidens who attended this personage started to unswathe the silks that covered her form, Serena beheld a grotesque being, a bulbous nose, jowls that hung down, and flesh that hung over in all directions. Serena could not help herself as she was there in her corner, thinking to herself, "Look at this being, so ugly, and yet with wealth, jewels, and I, having such physical beauty, but so poor." And although she loved Hamid dearly, this moment of observation weighed heavily on her heart. But she finished her bathing, and on her way back to where they lived, she made a resolve. So when she got back to her house, she said, "Beloved husband, you have to change your occupation. From tomorrow, you are going to be an astrologer." Hamid said, but I don't know anything about astrology. How can I become an astrologer? I know nothing. But Serena had made her resolve, "If you do not do this, I will divorce you." Hamid was totally shattered. The last thing that he could bear was to lose his beloved and beautiful wife. So with great trepidation, the very next morning, he went out and he sold his pick and his shovel. He bought himself some dice and an astrolabe and a piece of white cloth that he could bind around his head as a turban, and he went off to find a place on the steps of the mosque. But in his fear, he could hardly find the voice to speak out. "Astrologer, fortune's told here." And in his heart he was hoping that no one would come, but in another way praying that they would, because how would he feed his family? But just when he thought that nothing was going to happen and no coinage would come his way, a very rich being came up to him and said to him, "I am the retainer of the richest merchant in town, and the merchant has lost a camel laden with precious things. Tell me, where is it to be found?" So, sweating under his turban, poor Hamid, pretending to know what he was doing, moved around the dice on his little box and consulted his astrolabe, and then with a quivering voice, out of him came to the being, "Go to the market and buy a bag of chickpeas, and take those chickpeas and go in the direction that you find yourself and lay down the chickpeas, and when the chickpeas run out, turn around 3 times, and there you will find the camel." So the man greased Hamid's palm with silver and went off to follow his advice. Well, this was wonderful. For the first time in their lives, Hamid and his family could have kebabs and sweetmeats, halwa and all. They had a feast, but during all of this feasting, of course, Hamid had fear and trepidation in his heart. "I don't know about astrology," but bravely the very next day he went back to the mosque steps and sat there. But as he was waiting, all of a sudden this well-dressed being who had visited him yesterday came along with 2 burly men at his side. And Hamid, "Oh, they're coming to get me. They found out I'm a fraud." But when the being came up to Hamid, he was ecstatic. He said, "We found the camel. We found the camel with the wealth, and now my merchant wants to meet you." So Hamid had to accompany this being with the 2 burly servants back to the merchant's house, who greased Hamid's palm with gold and said, "I want you to be my personal astrologer. From now on, you will only work for me, and you will have a stipend once a month." Well, of course, Hamid at one level was totally elated, a fortune, able to take care of his family. But in his heart, his soul quivered with fear. I'm going to be found out. I'm a fraud. I know nothing about astrology. But every day Hamid went to the merchant's house and nothing happened. But then after a month, he went there one day and everyone was in disarray. Everyone was running around in great state because he was told that the night before 40 thieves had come and cleaned out the merchant's treasury. All his gold and silver was gone, that which he bought his trading items. So of course the merchant said to Hamid, "You must find these robbers. You must find my treasure." Now of course Hamid was devastated. What could he do? But he had the wherewithal to say, well, this is a very difficult problem. I will have to go away and consult my astrologer and my dice. But indeed, what he wanted to do was to go back and consult his beautiful wife, Serena. So when Hamid went back, Serena said, "Don't worry, God will take care of us. Go to the market, Hamid, and buy 40 dates so that we can count the days, and go to the merchant and tell him that it will take you 40 days to solve this very difficult problem." So this is what Hamid did, and of course the merchant gave him 40 days in which to find his treasure. So in the meantime, of course, the robbers had learned that the merchant had a private astrologer, and they were fearful because they heard that he was formidable. So they were afraid. So they conferred together, and it was decided that they would go to Hamid's house and eavesdrop to hear and find out what was going on. So one of the robbers went to Hamid's house that night and hid under the window. But it happened to be just at that moment that Hamid, on the instructions of his beautiful wife, had eaten one of the dates and thrown it into a receptacle that was under the window. And he said, "There goes one down." And the robber went back to his robbers and said, "He knows about us. He knows about us." But to confirm it, day after day, one of the robbers would go and hide, and so it was the 4th, 5th down. But the days passed, and the 40 days were up, and Hamid could not sleep. He was awaiting for the knock on the door that would be the retainers, the servants of the merchant, coming to get him. And what this moment of truth for him, found out who he really was. He was afraid, and indeed the knock on the door came. But when Hamid opened the door, it was a stranger. It was the chief robber, and he said to Hamid, please don't turn us in. If we tell you where the gold is, will you let us go? We'll leave town." And of course, Hamid agreed. So the robber chief went on his way, taking his band of robbers with him. And Hamid went to the merchant's house to give him the good news. And of course, they duly found the treasure in a well, and there was great celebration that took place. But of course, even though Hamid's palms were greased with gold again, he still, in his heart, carried the great fear, the weight of, I don't know about astrology. I'm going to be found out. But it so happened that the merchant, to celebrate having his treasure back, was going to give a great party, a reception, really on Hamid's behalf, to thank him for what he'd done. But when Hamid went back to his wife, he said, "Oh, my beloved wife, we are now rich beyond our greatest dreams, but I'm not an astrologer." And Serena said, "Don't worry, God will take care of us. I have an idea. In the reception, when the reception is taking place, you enter and you pretend to be mad, and you drag the merchant off his chair, and everyone will think that you're mad, and he will let you go." So this is what Hamid did when everyone was at the reception. Hamid went in and he grabbed the merchant from his chair, wrestled him to the ground. But just as the servants were quelling what was going on, someone noticed that on the merchant's chair there was a deadly scorpion. So the merchant was, and again he had to congratulate and thank Hamid for saving his life once again. So time went on, and of course Hamid, rich now, able to take care of his family, still in his heart wearing this great heaviness. What are we to do, Serena? What are we to do? And Serena said to him, "Well, I had a thought again. You know that the merchant goes to the public baths before he goes to the mosque. So when he goes to the bath and he's naked in the bath, drag him out, embarrass him in front of everyone, and they really will think that you've lost your mind." So this is what Hamid did. And when the merchant was naked in the hot tub, Hamid dragged him out into the street, and there was a great furor going on. But as everyone rushed to drag Hamid off the merchant, the roof of the bathhouse fell in. And again, Hamid had saved the life of the merchant. Well, of course, from that moment on, the merchant would not have Hamid out of his sight. Everywhere he went, he had to have his personal astrologer with him. But of course, still, Hamid was heavy, heavy, heavy with the weight of the fear that he was going to be found out to be a fraud. But it so happened that the merchant went out riding, hunting one day, and of course he had to have Hamid with him. So as they were out riding, strangely, a grasshopper happened to land on the sleeve of the merchant, and he grabbed the grasshopper. And for some reason he thought to himself, this is a good chance to test my beloved Hamid. So he rode over to Hamid and he said, my beloved astrologer, tell me, what do I have in my hand? Now this now truly was the moment of truth for Hamid. He was frozen with fear and realization. But in that moment, in that very moment, frozen as he was with this knowing that this was the moment of truth, an old Persian saying came to his lips. Grasshopper in the grass, grasshopper flying, grasshopper in the palm of the hand. The merchant opened his hand and out flew the grasshopper. Hamid, in that moment, realization rose up in him, flooded his being. So without another word, he dashed off on his horse, back to his house, alighted, went in and lifted up his beloved Serena, danced around the room with her and said, my beloved Serena, I believe God wants me to be an astrologer. I bow to the will of God. How does this story speak to us? Do we need to digest it, allow it to work in its way into our being? Or do we have this moment of ripeness and readiness, of receptivity, where all of a sudden what we've been talking about, the outside and the inside, come together? That's life, the doings, the experiences of life, and what's always been in here. Doesn't this story tell us what happens when they meet? When they meet, how does this story speak to us? What does it confirm for us? Or maybe we need to ingest it, let it cook up in our being. But surely they work, because we have our knowing. It's always been there. And when the events of life meet it, in those moments when we think we're frozen with fear or whatever else we might name it as, that's when it's there. The challenge for us after this is to live in that place where every moment we're living the peak experience, but we no longer give it, being frozen with fear, just intensely alive, tensely present, intensely alert, intensely aware. When life comes in and meets it, there we have the wonder. We're always in the right place, at the right time, doing what's there for us to do. How does this story speak to you? Thank you, thank you.